Why did everyone go quiet when she stepped off the truck? Maybe it was the way she carried herself, too calm for a new arrival, too still for someone about to face 8 weeks of brutal training. Or maybe it was because she didn't look like she belonged there. Corporal Riley Ashford's boots hit the gravel at Camp Pendleton with a soft crunch, swallowed by the roar of drill instructors and the rhythm of boots striking the parade ground. Gun oil and desert sage hung thick in the morning air. Around her, the mountains cut jagged silhouettes against a pale sky, hard, silent witnesses to every failure and every victory that had unfolded on this ground. Nobody looked at her twice. That was exactly how she preferred it. The advanced marksmanship course didn't care about ranks or reputations. It drew the best shooters from across the Marine Corps, men who had already proven themselves 100 times over, men who wore confidence like armor. And then there was her, one of one, the only woman in this cycle. The whispers started before she even reached the barracks. "Who's she?" "Another quota. She won't last a week." Riley ignored it all. She had learned long ago that silence was more powerful than defense. Words were just noise. Performance was truth. At the entrance to the range complex stood Sergeant Vance Kellerman, arms crossed over a chest like it had been carved from the same granite that surrounded the base. 2 decades of service showed in every line on his weathered face. His eyes tracked Riley as she approached with her sea bag slung over one shoulder. "You must be Ashford," he said, his voice steady, not cruel but testing. "Yes, Sergeant. They tell me you qualified expert at your last unit." "I did, Sergeant." Kellerman nodded slowly, almost like he'd heard that line before. Expert at your unit and expert here are two very different things. This course has a 60% washout rate. Most of those are men who have been shooting their whole lives. He paused, deliberate, heavy. "You understand what I'm saying?" Riley met his eyes without flinching. "I understand, Sergeant." He studied her a moment longer as if searching for a hint of hesitation, some flicker of self-doubt. But all he found was stillness, the kind that unnerved even seasoned Marines. "Good," he finally said. "We'll see if that calm survives past day one." The barracks was a long concrete block, echoing voices, metallic bunks, the smell of sweat and detergent. Riley chose a rack at the far end, away from the clusters of men already forming their little tribes. She unpacked quietly, movements precise, deliberate. And then it started. "Hey, check it out," a voice called from across the room. "Corporal Cupcake reporting for duty." Laughter followed, the kind that feeds off itself, that turns discomfort into entertainment. Riley didn't look up. She folded her uniforms with crisp corners, tucking them neatly into her footlocker. The voice belonged to Lance Corporal Derek Harmon, broad-shouldered, Texas-born, the type of Marine who made sure everyone knew it. He sauntered over, the swagger of someone who thought he owned the air around him. "No offense, sweetheart," he said, leaning against her bunk's post, "but what makes you think you can hang with us? This ain't basic rifle marksmanship. This is the real deal." Riley didn't look at him. "I qualified for the course same as you." Harmon smirked, glancing at his audience. "Yeah, but they've got quotas now, right? Gotta make sure everyone gets their participation trophy." More laughter. Riley finished folding her last uniform, set it in her locker, and finally turned. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching, not angry, just present. "Guess we'll find out on the range," she said. Something flickered in Harmon's expression, not fear but confusion. The way a predator looks when its prey doesn't run. He covered it with another grin. "Yeah, we'll see." When he walked away, Riley sat back down on her bunk. Her fingers found the familiar rhythm of lacing her boots. The sound of laughter faded into background noise. Inside her pocket, hidden under layers of camouflage fabric, was a small photograph. She didn't need to look at it. She knew every crease, every faded line. An old man stood on a ridge, wind tugging at his jacket, eyes shadowed by a brimmed cap. On the back, in neat, deliberate handwriting, 3 words were scrawled. Trust the fundamentals. She exhaled slowly. Tomorrow the real test would begin. At 4:30, the alarm cut through the dark like a blade. Riley was already awake. She always was. By the time the others stumbled out of their racks, she was dressed and squared away, her rifle cleaning kit ready. Outside, the desert air bit through their uniforms and their breaths hung visible under a sliver of moon. Sergeant Kellerman appeared from the shadows. "Good morning, Marines," he called. "Welcome to advanced marksmanship. Before the sun sets today, some of you will realize you don't belong here. By the end of this week, half of you will be gone. By the end of this course, only the best will remain." His gaze swept across the formation, hard, searching. This isn't basic training. Nobody cares about your feelings. Nobody cares about your excuses. The only thing that matters is what you can do with a rifle at distance. If you can't perform, you're done. Simple as that. A few chuckles rippled through the ranks, the nervous kind. Kellerman caught them instantly. "You think that's funny? You'll find out real soon what funny looks like through a 400-yard scope." Riley stood in the back row, silent. Her heart rate didn't change. Around her, Harmon stood a few Marines down, his energy loud even in silence. They marched to the armory as the eastern sky began to burn orange. One by one, rifles were issued, M4A5s, precision-tuned for distance shooting. Riley accepted hers, her hands moving over the metal with familiarity, checking the bolt, the trigger, the scope mounts. The weapon felt like an extension of her body. It was more than comfort, it was memory. On the 100-yard line, shooting mats were laid out in perfect rows. Riley settled prone, the rifle tucked into her shoulder, her cheek pressed against the stock. The position felt like coming home. Kellerman walked the line, inspecting, correcting, judging. When he stopped behind her, she could feel his gaze before he spoke. "Your position's solid," he said finally, a trace of surprise in his tone. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My father, Sergeant," she replied. "Not entirely true, but close enough." He grunted, "We'll see." The morning was spent zeroing, adjusting scopes so the point of aim matched the point of impact. Riley worked methodically, 3-round groups, adjustments, another set. Around her, frustration echoed, curses, muttered excuses, the clang of rifles slammed down too hard. From 3 positions away, Harmon's voice carried. "This rifle pulls left, scopes damaged." "Fix your fundamentals," an instructor shouted back. Riley tuned them all out, focused on the breath, the rhythm, the trigger break. By noon, her final 3-round group was one ragged hole dead center. Kellerman called for a ceasefire. He walked the line examining targets. When he reached hers, he stopped. "This," he said, raising the paper, "is what a proper zero looks like. Note the consistency, note the precision. This is the standard." The other Marines turned. Riley felt the weight of their eyes, the sting of envy, the whisper of disbelief. Harmon muttered, "Beginner's luck." Kellerman turned, voice calm but dangerous. "You think Corporal Ashford just got lucky, Lance Corporal?" "No disrespect, Sergeant. Just saying, zeroing at 100 yards ain't the same as shooting at 800. "You're right," Kellerman said. "That's why this afternoon we'll shoot at 3, 5, and 700. Maybe you'll show us how it's done." The smirk vanished from Harmon's face. The wind picked up in the afternoon, sharp, unpredictable. At 300 yards, the targets shimmered in the heat, dancing like ghosts. Riley closed her eyes for a moment and heard a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Wind is just information, Riley. Read it, trust it, don't fight it." She opened her eyes, observing the mirage, reading the patterns of air. Her hands moved almost unconsciously, adjusting, breathing, pressing. The rifle barked. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's vapor trail curve slightly, then strike dead center. One hit, then another, then another. When the line went cold, instructors walked the range. 5 rounds, 5 centermass hits, a grouping tight enough to hide under a playing card. Harmon's target 3 lanes away showed 2 hits, 3 misses. He stood stiff, jaw clenched, humiliation burning behind his eyes. As they walked back, he leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You had help, didn't you? Somebody gave you the wind calls." "Think whatever you want," Riley said, not breaking stride. "I'm watching you," he hissed. "Slip up once and everyone'll see you don't belong here." Riley turned, calm and direct. "I'm not your enemy, Harmon, the target is." He blinked, thrown off by the simplicity of it. By the time he thought of a comeback, she was already walking away. The sun was sinking low, washing the range in gold. Tomorrow they'd push farther. Tomorrow the tests would intensify. And Riley Ashford, the quiet corporal nobody noticed, would be ready. She always was. What made her so calm when the rain started? Most Marines cursed it, the cold that cut through uniforms, the mud that swallowed their elbows and knees, the rifles that grew slick with grime. But for Riley Ashford, rain was just another kind of silence, another element to read. By the start of week 2, the range at Pendleton had turned into a battlefield of patience. Wind, cold, mud, each one conspiring to erode focus. But Riley thrived in the discomfort, moving with the quiet precision of someone who had long ago learned that mastery wasn't about control, it was about acceptance. The 1,000-yard line stretched before them, the targets so far they blurred into the horizon. At that distance, every variable mattered: temperature, altitude, humidity. Even the rotation of the earth could shift a bullet's path by inches. Sergeant Kellerman moved up and down the line, his boots sinking into the mud. Beside him walked Gunnery Sergeant Price, a new instructor, shorter, leaner, his movements deliberate and economical. His face was carved by time and dust, his voice low and steady. Price didn't speak much that first day, he just watched. And what he saw in Riley's shooting made him pause. While others flinched against the wind, she adjusted for it. While the mud made them curse and shake their rifles clean, she worked within it, letting her elbows sink until the earth became part of her stability. When the ceasefire horn blew, Price's voice carried above the drizzle. "Corporal Ashford." Riley looked up. He studied her, eyes sharp, curious. "You shoot like someone who's done this before, who trained you." The entire firing line went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "My father taught me the basics, Gunny," she said evenly. "I practiced a lot after that." Price's head tilted slightly. "Your father must have been one hell of a shot." "Yes, Gunny," Riley said quietly. He didn't smile, but something flickered behind his expression. Recognition, memory. Then he simply nodded, "Keep it up." As he moved on, the other Marines stared. The whispers started again. "How's she doing that in this wind?" "She's cheating somehow." "Nobody shoots like that their first time." Riley ignored them all. She learned long ago that attention was a double-edged weapon. The moment people started watching, they also started waiting for the fall. And one man in particular was waiting harder than anyone. Lance Corporal Harmon. He had arrived at the course with a reputation, a regional shooting champion, a decorated marksman from his previous unit. He had swagger, confidence, stories that filled the air at night. But after 2 weeks, his name had dropped down the leaderboard and Riley was etched at the very top. Humiliation has a sound, quiet, sharp, heavy. It's the sound Harmon carried every time he passed her. That's when it started. The missing gear. The moved equipment. Her shooting mat, accidentally, soaked with water before range time. Little acts of sabotage disguised as pranks. Nobody said anything. Nobody ever does. In the military, you either endure or break. Those were the unspoken rules. Riley endured. Each time she reset her gear, checked her rifle, and kept her scores tight. Her patience became her weapon, and her excellence her revenge. By Friday, her name was still on top, Harmon's 7th. That weekend, the instructors gave them study time. Others hit the base exchange, joked, watched football. Riley disappeared into the hills. She found her place, a jagged overlook above the range, where the desert rolled out in muted browns and greens, dotted with sage. She sat cross-legged, hands resting on her knees, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. A soft voice broke the wind. That breathing pattern, I've only seen one other person use it. Riley opened her eyes. Gunny Price stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, studying the horizon. She didn't answer, just waited. I was a student once, Price continued, lowering himself onto a rock. Different war, different time, but there was an instructor legendary even back then. Name was Elias Thorne. The name hit her chest like a heartbeat she'd been holding back. He taught us things that weren't in any manual, Price said. Things about wind and breath and stillness. Said half of shooting was reading the world, not fighting it. His eyes slid to her. He also taught that same breathing technique you were just using. Riley's face remained still, but her pulse quickened. She looked out over the valley, pretending to study the targets below. I've heard the name, she said softly. Stories mostly. Everyone's heard them, Price replied. Most people don't believe them. He looked away again, his gaze distant. But I do. I saw him shoot. Saw him make impossible shots look easy. He was different. The Corps never knew what to do with him. He was too good, too unorthodox. When he retired, he disappeared into the mountains. Montana, I think. Riley's throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe. Price stood, brushing dust from his uniform. There's a reason we stopped talking about Thorne officially, he said. The Corps doesn't like legends it can't control. If someone learned from him, if someone carried his methods forward, he paused, meeting her eyes. They'd be smart to keep that quiet, at least until they've proven themselves beyond any doubt. The silence between them held the weight of understanding. Yes, Gunny, Riley said quietly. Good. Price nodded once, then walked away, his boots crunching softly against the rock. Moving targets next week. Don't let the ghosts get to you. When he was gone, Riley sat motionless, the desert wind tugging at her hair. He knew. Or at least he suspected. And if he suspected, others might soon too. She pulled the photograph from her pocket, the one with Thorne standing on that mountain ridge, eyes unreadable. She studied it until the colors blurred in the fading light. Did you know this would happen? She wondered. Did you train me for this? The wind whispered through the sage. Somewhere in it she almost heard his voice, not as a sound but as memory. Trust the fundamentals. She slipped the photo back into her pocket and watched the sun dip behind the mountains. Tomorrow was Sunday, one day of quiet before the storm returned. But storms never stayed away for long. Monday came with a wind that felt alive, a feral, restless thing howling down from the peaks. Moving targets, Kellerman shouted over the gusts. Welcome to the real world, Marines. The moving target range stretched like a scar through the desert, steel silhouettes gliding on hidden rails, unpredictable speeds, angles, distances. This was where shooters stopped being shooters and started becoming hunters. Kellerman's voice boomed. Moving targets don't care about your perfect position. They don't wait for your breathing cycle. They demand adaptability, anticipation, and decision-making under pressure. Most of you will fail this drill. And that's fine, failure teaches. But if you freeze, if you panic, you're done. Riley drew the third firing position. She watched the first Marine go 4 misses out of 5. Then another 2 hits. Each struggled to find the rhythm. The wind, the motion, the speed, everything demanded intuition, not calculation. When her name was called, Riley moved forward, dropped prone, and settled her rifle. The world shrank to scope and breath. The first target appeared, a steel figure gliding right to left at 300 yards. She let it move, tracking not the shape but its rhythm, its tempo. Her crosshairs led by inches, not thought but instinct. The trigger broke. A perfect ring echoed across the range. Then another and another. Each hit sang like punctuation marks in silence. 5 for 5, the spotter called. Clean sweep. Kellerman approached her position, crouching beside her. Where'd you learn to shoot movers like that? Hunting, Sergeant, Riley said, her tone even. Deer don't stand still. For the first time, Kellerman smiled, a small, sharp thing. Your deer hunting just put you back at the top of the class. He moved on. 6 lanes down, Harmon's shots rang out. The results were predictable: 3 hits, 2 misses. Respectable, but not enough. His jaw clenched as Kellerman corrected his form. When the sergeant walked away, Harmon slammed his rifle onto the mat. The sound carried like thunder. You got a problem, Lance Corporal? Kellerman's voice was ice. No, Sergeant. Good, because that rifle's worth more than you are. Treat it that way. The other Marines went quiet. Riley didn't look at him, didn't have to. She could feel the storm brewing. The afternoon brought the chaos drills, random targets appearing at unknown distances for mere seconds. It mimicked combat: find, range, engage, and move before being found. Riley waited for the horn. When it blared, she swept the range with her eyes left to right, near to far. A flicker of motion at 600 yards. Target moving left to right, wind 15 miles per hour crosswise. Her brain didn't think, it translated. 600 yards, moving at 4 meters per second, 3-click correction, half-mil hold. The rifle barked. Target dropped flat. Kill shot. 10 drills, 10 targets, 8 kills, 2 grazes, best performance of the day. When she cleared her rifle, she found Price waiting. Walk with me, he said quietly. They stepped away from the range, toward the ridge. The wind pressed at their uniforms. I made some calls, Price began. Talked to a few old friends. There was a rumor years ago that Thorne took on a private student after retirement. A woman, someone with potential. Sound familiar? Riley didn't answer. Thorne scared people, he said. He was too good, too intuitive. The Corps loved his results, hated his methods. They tried to study him, replicate him, broke him instead. His voice softened. If they find out what you are, where you learned, they'll want to do the same to you. Riley met his eyes. Then I'll be ready. Price studied her for a moment, then nodded. You better be, because what I saw today, that wasn't just skill, that was art, and art makes the system nervous. That night she found her bunk disturbed, her gear scattered, and on her pillow a note. Is this your boyfriend? Beside it lay the photograph of Thorne. The air in her chest turned to ice. Around her, the barracks hummed with the careful silence of complicity. Harmon sat at his bunk, pretending not to watch her. Riley said nothing. She gathered her things quietly, restored order, and slipped the photo back into her pocket. No shouting, no accusations, just silence sharp enough to cut. Let them wonder. Tomorrow the course would move to unconventional shooting, rooftops, vehicles, barricades, the hardest phase yet. And as the lights went out, Riley lay still on her bunk, the photograph warm against her heart. Trust the fundamentals, she thought. Because the ghosts weren't done with her yet. Why was she still calm when everyone else started breaking? By the 3rd week, the advanced marksmanship course had entered its cruelest stage, the one that stripped even the best shooters bare. Gone were the neat lines and static targets. This was chaos now, awkward angles, unstable footing, improvised positions that twisted muscle memory into knots. The Marines called it unconventional shooting. The instructors called it Truth Week. Because this was where the truth came out, about balance, about focus, about what kind of person you were when nothing lined up the way it was supposed to. They shot from behind barricades, from the roofs of Humvees, from window frames and burned-out vehicles. Every surface was uneven, every movement uncomfortable. The human body wasn't built for this kind of precision, and that was exactly the point. Riley excelled. She flowed through the positions with quiet, unnerving grace. While others wrestled their rifles into compliance, she made each movement look deliberate, practiced, almost familiar. From the hood of a truck, she stabilized her weapon, found her breath, and sent a round clean through a target 700 yards away. The spotter's voice crackled over the range radio. Hit! 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 Sergeant Kellerman watched her from behind his binoculars, expression unreadable. By now, even he had stopped pretending she was just another student. When she cleared her weapon, he motioned her over. "Walk with me." They stepped off the firing line, dust swirling around their boots. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Kellerman said, not looking at her. "I've trained hundreds of Marines, good ones, bad ones, some who could shoot circles around me. But what I'm seeing from you," he paused, his voice dropping, "that's not normal training, that's something else entirely." Riley's face remained still. "I had good instruction, Sergeant." He stopped, turning toward her. "This isn't just good instruction. This is instinct. The kind of instinct that only comes from repetition so deep it rewires the body." His tone softened, not suspicion now, but something closer to wonder. "I'm not trying to jam you up, Ashford. I'm just saying, when you graduate, and you will, higher-ups are going to ask how a corporal with no sniper background blew through the hardest course in the Corps like she's been doing it for years." "What if the truth is complicated?" she asked quietly. "Then you better figure out how to make it simple," Kellerman said. "Because one way or another, that truth is coming out. Better it comes from you than from someone else." She nodded once. Kellerman started to walk away, then stopped. "And for what it's worth," he said, glancing over his shoulder, "whoever trained you, they knew what they were doing." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the echo of his words and the sting of memory. They knew what they were doing. She could almost hear Thorne's voice again, the calm baritone that had once guided her through the forests of Montana, the patient rhythm of instruction under skis that stretched forever. "Every position tells you something about yourself," he'd said once. "When your body fights the rifle, it's not the rifle's fault. It's yours. Listen to what it's telling you." The ghosts of those lessons lived in her now. That night, the air in the barracks felt heavier than usual. When Riley returned from the showers, the smell hit her first damp fabric. Her bunk was drenched, the sheets dark and wet, her sleeping bag soaked through. For a second, nobody said a word. Then laughter erupted from the far end of the room. It was Harmon, of course it was. He lounged back on his bunk, trying to hide his grin behind a half-hearted cough. The other Marines looked away, pretending to mind their own business, but their silence was its own confession. Riley stood at the edge of her bunk, water dripping from her mattress. Her hands didn't move. Her face didn't change. This was it, the breaking point they'd been waiting for. The moment they wanted to see her snap. Instead, she stripped the soaked bedding with calm precision, carried it outside and hung it over the line. Then she came back in, pulled a dry sleeping bag from her spare gear and remade the bunk, each corner tucked tight, each fold exact. Then she lay down. No words. No reaction. Just silence. It spread through the barracks like a chill. The laughter died out, eyes turned away. And in that silence, Harmon's smirk faded. Because the worst thing you can do to a bully isn't fight back. It's deny him the satisfaction of your pain. Riley closed her eyes, her body still. But inside, her thoughts were coiled tight, not with anger but with something colder. Resolve. Week 4 brought the stress shoots. If unconventional shooting tested skill, stress shoots tested control. They ran obstacle courses until their lungs burned, sprinted under full gear, crawled through dust and wire, and then, gasping, trembling, shaking from exertion, had to pick up their rifles and hit targets hundreds of yards away. It was chaos, deliberate chaos. Heart pounding, hands unsteady, breath uneven, and yet the shot had to be perfect. For most, it was impossible. For Riley, it was familiar. She had done this before, not here, but years ago, running up mountain ridges in Montana while Thorne stood at the top, stopwatch in hand, his voice echoing down the slope. Again. Faster. Now shoot. He had made her fire when she could barely see straight, when her muscles screamed, when her mind begged to stop. Because that's when truth appeared, when instinct took over and discipline was no longer a choice but a reflex. Riley found that rhythm again now. Run, drop, breathe. Sight picture. Trigger. Follow through. Her rounds found center mass again and again, even as her pulse thundered in her ears. Harmon did well too, strong, fast, physically dominant. For once, he finished the runs ahead of her. But when it came to the shooting, his hands were too eager, his mind too loud. He was good, she was better. Always by just enough to matter. And for Harmon, that was intolerable. It happened on Thursday. The sun hung heavy over the range, heat shimmering across the distance. The Marines had just finished their last stress course. Half of them collapsed on the ground, panting, rifles clutched loosely in shaking hands. Riley was reloading when she heard her name sharp, cutting through the exhaustion. You know what everyone's saying, right? She turned. Harmon stood there, face red, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. They're saying you slept your way here. That's the only reason you're still standing. The air went still. The laughter, the movement, the noise. All of it died. Riley met his eyes calm, unflinching. Is that what you think? I think there's no way you're this good without cheating, Harmon snapped. Someone gave you the answers. Maybe your boyfriend, the ghost sniper, left you a playbook. Murmurs rippled through the group. Before Kellerman could step in, a different voice cut across the range. Lance Corporal Harmon. Gunny Price. He strode forward, his expression thunderous. You just made a very serious accusation. You got proof. Harmon faltered, blinking, realizing too late that he'd gone too far. I just meant it doesn't make sense. Price didn't let him finish. No, you meant exactly what you said. And now you have two options. Apologize right here, right now, or we march you up to the co and you repeat that accusation to his face. But understand, if an investigation finds nothing, you're done. The silence was absolute. Harmon looked around, searching for backup, for allies. None came. Even his closest friends had stepped away. His voice dropped to a forced mutter. I apologize. Riley nodded once. Apology accepted. Price turned to face the rest of the group. His voice hardened, cutting through the air like the crack of a rifle. In 30 years of service, I've seen exactly two shooters perform like Corporal Ashford. Two. One of them was Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, the best sniper this corps ever produced. The other one, he gestured toward Riley, is standing right here. So if anyone else thinks about questioning her ability, you better bring more than jealousy. You better bring proof. The weight of his words hit the range like a physical force. And in that moment, that single blistering moment, Riley's secret stopped being secret. Because everyone knew who Thorne was. And now everyone knew who she must have been to him. The barracks that night was silent. Not the usual hum of talk and laughter, just silence. The kind that comes when legends stop being stories and start being real. Riley sat on her bunk, cleaning her rifle in slow, practiced motions. The photograph burned like a coal in her pocket. Price had meant well. Maybe he even thought he was protecting her. But what he'd done was open a door that could never be closed again. The whispers that used to question her place had changed tone now. No longer mockery. Now it was awe, fear, curiosity. The Ghost Sniper Student. The title spread through the camp like wildfire. And with it came attention, the kind she'd spent her whole life trying to avoid. That night, when the barracks lights dimmed and the base fell quiet, Riley sat awake on her bunk, staring at her reflection in the dark window. You wanted to prove you belonged, she thought. Now they'll never see you as anything else. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. Thorne's eyes stared back, hard, knowing, almost alive. Trust the fundamentals, it said on the back. But which fundamentals? The ones about shooting or the ones about truth? Outside, the desert wind shifted. A distant rifle crack echoed somewhere on the range, a late-night instructor demonstration maybe, or something else. Riley closed her eyes and let the sound roll through her like memory. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. And tomorrow, she knew, the real tests would begin not on the range, but in the eyes that would now follow her everywhere. How do you keep breathing when the whole world suddenly wants to see you prove you're real? After that day on the range, Riley Ashford stopped being invisible. Every corridor she walked through carried whispers. Every break room conversation went quiet when she entered. To some, she was a curiosity. To others, a threat. But to command, she was a question. 2 mornings later, the message came down. Report to the Co's office at 900. She arrived early. That's what people did when they didn't want to look like they were afraid. The waiting area smelled of polish and coffee. A clock ticked loud in the silence. When the door finally opened, Lieutenant Colonel Dyer motioned her in. He was a square-jawed career Marine, the kind of officer whose ribbons seemed to weigh him down more than they decorated him. Corporal Ashford, he began, voice measured, almost polite. You've been making quite an impression. Yes, sir. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Sit. Riley sat, hands on her knees, back straight. I've been reviewing your scores, Dyer continued. Top of your class in every phase, even our instructors are impressed. He paused, studying her. But I also hear your name connected to another, Master Sergeant Elias Thorne. You're aware of the rumors? Yes, sir. Dyer leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Then tell me directly, did Thorne train you? For a moment, the air itself felt heavy. Riley's heartbeat stayed slow, deliberate. He did, sir. After his retirement, I was 16. Dyer didn't react right away. He just nodded once like he'd half expected the answer. You understand how this looks. The Corps tried to keep Thorne's methods classified. He refused to cooperate. He became a problem. You're walking around carrying the knowledge he wouldn't share. I'm not sharing it either, sir. Maybe not yet. His tone hardened. But if the press ever finds out we've got Thorne's protege training under us, they'll dig. They'll turn you into a headline, and the Corps doesn't like headlines. She kept her eyes forward. I didn't ask for that, sir. I just wanted to earn my place. That's the problem, Dyer said softly. You did. He rose, walking to the window. We've got an evaluation next week, a long-range qualification at 1,200 yards, one shot. You make it clean, this conversation never happened. You miss it. His reflection met hers in the glass. Then I'll have to decide whether you're an asset or a liability. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Riley saluted, turned, and left, calm on the outside, storm on the inside. 1,200 yards, one shot, the ghost range. It wasn't just distance. It was reputation. Every instructor knew the story. Years ago, Thorne had taken that shot blind through crosswind and dust, nailed the steel plate dead center, and walked away without a word. They'd called it impossible. He'd called it practice. Now his student would stand in the same spot. That night she couldn't sleep. The barracks breathed around her, slow, even, unaware. Outside, the wind whispered across the range, carrying the dry scent of cordite and dust. Riley sat up, reached into her locker, and pulled out the old notebook she'd kept hidden inside a waterproof sleeve. The cover was worn smooth, edges frayed from years of travel. Inside were sketches, equations, notes, a Thorne's words, her handwriting. Wind speaks in motion, not sound. Don't command the bullet, guide it. A miss teaches more than a hit if you have the humility to listen. Her thumb traced the page. She could almost hear him packing behind her again, boots crunching over gravel, voice calm but firm. You'll never outshoot the world, Riley, but you can out-understand it. She closed the notebook, pressing it against her chest. The next 7 days would decide everything, not just her career, but whether Thorne's ghost remained myth or truth. The morning of the test rose clean and cold. 12 shooters lined the ridge. The range stretched into haze, target barely visible even through high-power optics. Instructors checked flags, radios, barometers. Wind 5 to 8, full value left, Kellerman called. Temperature 71, humidity 20%. Each shooter had 1 round, 1 trigger press. Riley's lane was last. She watched as each Marine took position, steadied their breath, and fired. Some hit, some didn't. The clangs echoed faint and hollow. When her turn came, she stepped forward, lay prone, and unfolded the bipod. Her body settled into the earth, spine straight, elbows locked, breath deep. Price crouched beside her. You ready? Yes, Gunny. He nodded, stepping back. Show them how ghosts shoot. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a shimmering oval of light. Mirage lines danced across the desert. Wind flags rippled, never steady. Riley felt it, the pulse of the earth, the small movements no one else noticed. She let her breathing fall into rhythm with it. Trust the fundamentals. Her finger touched the trigger. Pressure built, slow and clean. The rifle exhaled thunder. A half-second later, clang. Center. Not just a hit, a perfect one. The range fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Then cheers broke out, scattered at first, then building. But Riley barely heard them. She stayed behind the rifle, watching the faint wisp of dust drift from the target like smoke. 1 shot, 1 truth. Kellerman's voice cracked through the radio. Perfect center, confirmed. That's a first for this cycle. Price turned, smiling, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Congratulations, Corporal. You just carved your name into the record book. But Riley didn't smile back, because somewhere behind that satisfaction was a quiet ache, the awareness that with every perfect shot, she was becoming less a person and more a legend. And legends don't sleep easy. 2 days later, orders came down. The top 3 shooters would travel to Camp Ironclad, an active-duty outpost testing new long-range systems. They'd spend 2 weeks running field scenarios, live targets, simulated combat, full-stress conditions. It was supposed to be an honor. It felt like a setup. When the transport truck rolled out at dawn, Riley sat across from Harmon. His eyes avoided hers now. Whatever resentment he carried had curdled into something else, guilt maybe, or fear. The drive took them deep into desert country. No towns, no noise, just miles of cracked earth and distant mountains. Camp Ironclad wasn't much. A handful of prefab buildings, 2 ranges, a control tower, and a perimeter fence that hummed under the sun. As they disembarked, an officer in tan utilities greeted them. Welcome to Ironclad. Out here the rules are simple. Hit what you aim at, trust your team, and don't waste ammo. Easy words, hard reality. Because by day's end, Riley realized the scenarios weren't just shooting drills, they were covert mission simulations, designed to test leadership under real psychological pressure. Night ops, moving targets in near dark, radio coordination under chaos. Her squad, Price as instructor, Harmon as secondary shooter, and 3 others she barely knew. By the 3rd night, exhaustion ran through all of them like sand in the blood. That's when everything went wrong. It was supposed to be a simple recon sniper simulation. 2-man team infiltration. Observe, record, exfiltrate. But halfway through, their comms went dead. The training field stretched over 20 square miles of desert, easy to get lost, easier to panic. Harmon wanted to turn back. Riley didn't. "We follow the plan," she said. "The plan's compromised," he snapped. "So improvise." He glared at her, sweat streaking the dust on his face. "You think because you can shoot straight, you get to call the shots." "No," she said calmly. "I think because we're still alive, someone should." They argued in whispers as night deepened. The temperature dropped fast. Wind began to roar across the flats. Their only light came from the moon. Then movement, far ridge, a shape crossing the skyline. Riley froze. Through her scope she caught it, one silhouette, rifle in hand, moving with intent. Not part of the exercise, too far from the grid. She tapped Harmon's arm. "You see that?" He looked, cursed softly. "That's not one of ours." Before they could decide what to do, a flash erupted, distant muzzle flare. A round hissed past, burying into the sand near her shoulder. "Real bullets." "Down," she hissed. They dove behind a rock outcrop. Harmon's voice cracked. "This isn't a drill." "I know." They had stumbled into something that wasn't supposed to exist, smugglers maybe, or Black Ops testing gone wrong. It didn't matter. All that mattered was staying alive. Riley peeked from cover, scanning. 2 targets now, moving fast, coordinated. She set her scope, adjusted for wind and elevation. Her heartbeat slowed. Thorne's voice again, as clear as if he knelt beside her, breathed through the chaos. She exhaled, fired. First shot dropped the lead figure. Second round, center mass on the second. Silence, then the sound of bodies hitting sand. For a long moment, nothing moved. Harmon's breath shook. "Holy hell, you just..." Riley cut him off. "We need to move." They exfiltrated under darkness, navigating by stars and memory. When they finally reached camp near dawn, Price was waiting. The look in his eyes said everything: relief, anger, confusion. "Report," he demanded. Riley explained, concise, precise, emotionless. When she finished, Price said quietly, "We'll verify your story. For now, you two get checked out." As medics led them toward the infirmary, Harmon turned to her, voice barely a whisper. "You saved my life." Riley didn't answer. Because somewhere deep inside, she wasn't sure it had been her who fired those shots, or the echo of the man who taught her how. That night, the official report classified the event as unexpected contact with unauthorized personnel. No further detail, no media, no debrief. Just silence. The Corps liked silence. But silence had weight. And as Riley lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, she realized what Thorne had meant all along. It was never about the shot. It was about what followed after, when the noise stopped, and you had to live with what the silence told you. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? For 3 days after the firefight, nobody spoke to her, not properly, not about what mattered. The incident at Camp Ironclad vanished from reports faster than it had appeared. The debriefs were routine, the paperwork clean, too clean. Officially, it had never happened. And yet, Riley Ashford could still hear the echo of those 2 shots, crisp, surgical, final. She could still see the silhouettes drop, could still feel the way her body had moved without thought, the way instinct had taken over. That night in the desert had changed something in her, or revealed something that had been waiting all along. When command said stand down, she obeyed. When they said return to base, she did, but part of her hadn't come back. It stayed out there, among the rocks and wind, with the ghosts that always seemed to follow her. When they got back to Pendleton, the base felt different. The salutes came slower. The conversation stopped faster. News spreads quietly in the military. No official memo, just glances, whispers, a shift in tone. People knew something had gone down, something classified. They also knew who had come back. Gunny Price met her the morning after they returned. He looked older, heavier, his face drawn. "Walk with me," he said. They went out past the range perimeter, where the wind could drown out the rest of the world. "I read the report," he began. "What's left of it anyway? They scrubbed half of it before I even saw it." Riley said nothing. "You realize what that means?" he asked. "They're covering it." "Exactly. Which means whatever you stumbled into out there wasn't just random smugglers. It was ours." Riley looked up. "Our people." He nodded grimly. "Test group, maybe. Private contractors. The Corps has been outsourcing weapons trials for years. Sometimes lines get blurred. You walked right across one." Her stomach turned cold, "and they'll pretend it never happened." "They already have." The wind whipped dust across their boots. Price looked away toward the horizon. "They'll keep you quiet with medals or orders, maybe both. But make no mistake, Ashford, from this point on, you're not a student, you're an asset." She frowned. "That's supposed to be a promotion." He met her eyes. "No, it's a warning." That afternoon, she was summoned again, this time not by Kellerman or Dyer, but by a civilian liaison from the Office of Special Operations Liaison Command. The woman wore a charcoal suit and no insignia. Her smile was professional, practiced, almost kind. "Corporal Ashford," she said, gesturing for Riley to sit. "You've had quite a few eyes on you lately. Outstanding scores, exceptional composure under pressure, and then this recent incident." Riley didn't answer. The woman continued, crossing one leg over the other. "We value Marines who can operate calmly under unconventional circumstances, people who can make decisions without hesitation. We think you could be one of those people." "What are you asking me?" Riley said. "A trial assignment," the woman replied. "Off the record, non-combat, observation and evaluation. If you perform as we expect, you'll have your pick of postings." Riley studied her. "And if I do?" The smile didn't waver. "Then you go back to being a corporal who shot well once, and eventually people forget." There it was, the real choice. Silence or service, both cages just built differently. "When do we leave?" Riley asked. The woman's smile widened slightly. "That's the spirit." That night Riley went to the range alone. No instructors, no spotters, just her, the desert, and the rifle. The stars stretched endless above her, cold and sharp. She lay prone, sighted the steel plate at 800 yards and didn't shoot. She just breathed. "This is what they want from you," she thought. A ghost with a heartbeat. In her chest, the memory of Thorne's voice stirred again. "There will come a day when they'll want to own what you are. Don't let them." Her finger hovered above the trigger. She didn't pull it. She just whispered into the wind, "I'm not yours." And then softly she fired. The round hit dead center. Her temporary assignment came fast. No announcement, no ceremony. Just orders sealed in a manila envelope and a silent handshake from Kellerman. "Keep your head down," he said, "and watch your six." The team was small, 5 people, all deniable, none wearing names on their uniforms. They flew out under false manifest, their destination classified even from them. When the ramp dropped, Riley tasted salt in the air, somewhere coastal, somewhere forgotten. The operation was officially surveillance support. Unofficially, it was a cleanup, the kind that never reached headlines. They set up observation posts overlooking an abandoned airstrip, long since repurposed by someone else. Riley didn't ask who. The less you knew, the safer you stayed. For 3 days nothing happened. Just distant waves, seagulls, and static-filled radios. On the 4th night, a convoy appeared, headlights crawling through the dark. "Targets entering the field," the team leader whispered over comms. "Unmarked vehicles, civilian pattern." Riley adjusted her scope, breath slowing. Her spotter shifted beside her, whispering readings. "Wind 4 left, distance 950. Through the scope she saw figures unloading crates. Not soldiers, contractors, American gear, government issue. Her gut twisted. "Command, this is Watcher 2, her team leader murmured. "We've got unknowns on the strip. Request guidance." Static answered. "Command, confirm." The radio crackled once, then died. The team froze. And then the first explosion went off. A shockwave tore through the night, flinging dust and fire into the sky. Vehicles ignited one after another, secondary detonations, turning the strip into chaos. "Ambush," someone shouted. "Get down." Tracer fire streaked through the dark. The sky turned orange. Riley hit the ground, adrenaline slamming through her veins. Her ears rang. She scanned for shooters, but there were too many, too organized. This wasn't an ambush. This was an erasure. Someone was cleaning up. Her team scattered, returning fire where they could, but it was hopeless. 2 went down in seconds. The team leader shouted for retreat, voice half drowned in static. Riley dragged one of the wounded behind cover, pressed her hand to his chest, felt the blood pumping out fast and hot. "Stay with me," she whispered. His eyes found hers for half a second, confused, scared, and then went still. Another explosion lit the sky. She grabbed her rifle, sighted through smoke and dust, and fired twice, dropping 2 silhouettes moving toward them. She didn't think, didn't feel, just moved. By the time the firing stopped, the strip was burning. The survivors, if any, were ghosts themselves. When dawn came, there were no reinforcements, no rescue chopper, no command frequency. Just silence. And in that silence, Riley understood. The Corps wasn't covering for her anymore. It was covering from her. 3 days later, a civilian transport ship fished her out off the coast, dehydrated, half-conscious. She gave no name, no rank, no story. They dropped her at a port hospital. She signed herself out before the paperwork caught up. Somewhere in a government office, her file was reclassified. Missing, presumed KIA. Riley Ashford ceased to exist. The Corps lost a soldier. The world gained a ghost. For months she drifted border to border, motel to motel. She changed names, cut her hair, learned to be invisible again. But invisibility comes with memories, and memories are loud when nothing else is. At night she dreamed of the ridge, the echo of Thorne's voice, the day she made that 1,200-yard shot, the faces of the ones she couldn't save. She woke up gasping, always in the same way, hands gripping an invisible rifle, finger tight on an imaginary trigger. There were moments she wanted to disappear for good, to become the myth everyone already believed. And then she'd remember his words. "They'll never understand you, Riley. That's not your burden. Yours is to protect what they can't." So she stayed alive, quietly. Because ghosts can protect too, just from the shadows. It was 6 months before she saw Price again. A diner in some forgotten town off the interstate. He looked older, thinner, wearing civilian clothes that didn't fit quite right. He slid into the booth across from her, without a word. "I figured you'd find me," she said softly. "I didn't," he replied. "You found me, you always did." They sat in silence for a long while, the hum of the neon sign filling the space between them. Finally Price spoke. "I read the after-action summaries, or what was left of them. You were set up. I know. They wanted you gone. Too clean a record, too many eyes watching. You and I both know what happens when a ghost becomes real." She looked down at her coffee. "Then why am I still breathing?" He leaned forward. "Because some ghosts are useful, and because someone maybe up there, maybe not, wants you to keep existing. But that doesn't mean they won't come looking again. I'm tired of running." "Then stop," Price said. "But choose what kind of ghost you'll be, the kind that hides or the kind that haunts." Riley met his eyes. "I never wanted to haunt anyone." "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but you already do." He stood, left money on the table, and walked out. Riley sat there for a long time, listening to the rain start outside, each drop a steady heartbeat against the window. When she finally left, she slipped a folded photograph under her coffee cup, the one of Thorne on the ridge, words faded but still visible. Trust the fundamentals. Then she stepped into the rain and disappeared. How long can a ghost stay silent before the living start rewriting her story? 6 months had passed since the diner. Riley had vanished into America's forgotten edges, the places where nobody asked names and cash was still king. She worked odd jobs under different aliases, lived cheap, and spoke to no one longer than necessary. The world believed she was dead, and most days she let it. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. It started with a headline she wasn't supposed to see. She was in a roadside gas station outside Yuma, waiting for her coffee, when a muted TV above the counter caught her eye. Exclusive footage from a private defense firm demonstrating the legendary Thorne method, sniper system, inspired by the techniques of the late Master Sergeant Elias Thorne. Riley's chest tightened. The screen showed slow-motion clips of corporate-sponsored marksmen firing across desert ranges, the company logo stamped in gold. SILVERMARK Defense SOLUTIONS. The narrator's voice boomed, incorporating once classified training principles rediscovered by our instructors. Rediscovered. Her grip on the paper cup tightened until the lid cracked. She watched the broadcast to the end, saw a man in tactical gear give interviews, posing with rifles, smiling for cameras. The caption read, Chief Technical Advisor Derek Harmon. The room tilted for a moment. She had to steady herself against the counter. He'd taken Thorne's name, their name, and turned it into a brand. That night in a cheap motel off the highway, Riley sat on the bed with her laptop glowing pale in the dark. Her fingers moved slowly over the keyboard, tracing the digital trail. Silvermark Defense Solutions, newly formed, private contracting, government-funded. Headquartered in San Diego. Press release dated 3 weeks ago. And there it was, Harmon's photo, clean-shaven, polished, standing beside senators and CEOs. A quote beneath it, "We carry forward the methods of the legendary ghost sniper himself. My mentor taught me everything I know." Mentor. Riley stared at the word until her vision blurred. She closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled through her teeth. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft of legacy, of truth, of everything Thorne had stood for. She'd spent her life guarding that name in silence. Harmon had turned it into a marketing slogan. And if he'd used her old data, her recorded training footage, her performance stats, then it wasn't just Thorne's ghost he'd stolen. It was hers. For 2 days she debated. Run or return. Forget or confront. But every time she tried to let it go, the same sentence echoed back. Trust the fundamentals. The fundamentals weren't just about wind and distance. They were about integrity. And integrity didn't let lies live long. She took a bus to San Diego under the name Reese Allen, carrying only a duffel bag and an old scope she never could bring herself to sell. The city had changed, glass towers rising over streets that still smelled like salt and asphalt. Silvermark's office sat high above the bay, shining and clean, the kind of building that pretended it had nothing to hide. She watched from across the street for hours. Security, entrances, timing. She mapped everything with the patience of a sniper reading the wind. By nightfall, she'd found what she needed, the janitorial service schedule. At 200, she walked through the lobby wearing a maintenance uniform she'd bought from a surplus store. Nobody looked twice. Up the elevator, 22nd floor, the hum of computers and the faint scent of ozone. Inside Harmon's office, she moved with surgical precision, gloved hands, no footprints. On his desk, a half-empty glass of whiskey and a framed certificate. Awarded to Derek Harmon, for excellence in tactical innovation. Her stomach twisted. She powered up his computer, bypassed security, found the internal drive labeled THORNE project. When she opened it, her breath caught. Video files, dozens of them. Training footage from Pendleton, her footage. The same shooting sequences Price had recorded for performance analysis. She clicked one. There she was, years younger, lying prone under a desert sun, steady and calm. Her voice on the recording quiet, focused. Wind to right, half-mil hold. And over it, Harmon's narration dubbed in. This was how Master Sergeant Thorne trained his elite shooters, using proprietary breathing and stability techniques that I personally refined. He'd cut her voice out completely, replaced it with his own. The betrayal hit like recoil. She copied the entire folder onto a flash drive, closed the laptop, and turned toward the door. But the hallway light flicked on before she could move. Harmon stood there. For a long, breathless second, neither of them spoke. He looked older, softer around the edges, but the arrogance hadn't left his eyes. "Well," he said, smirking faintly, "if it isn't the ghost herself." Riley didn't move. "You're stealing his name." "I'm honoring it," Harmon said smoothly. "Somebody had to. The Corps buried Thorne, I resurrected him." "You resurrected yourself," she replied, "using footage you didn't earn and words you didn't understand." He shrugged. "Semantics, people don't care about truth, Ashford. They care about stories, and this one sells." Her jaw tightened. "You were never his student." "Maybe not," Harmon said, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "But I was yours, and that's close enough." The words landed like a slap. "You think you're untouchable," she said quietly. He smiled. "No, I think I'm smart. You could be too if you stop playing the martyr. You and I could run this together. Ghost Sniper Academy, online courses, endorsements, contracts. You bring the myth, I bring the showmanship." Riley's silence cut sharper than any refusal. He chuckled, sensing victory. "See, you don't say no right away. You know I'm right. Legends are worthless if no one remembers them." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You remember him wrong." And before he could reply, she turned and walked past him, calm, deliberate, leaving the flash drive slot empty on his desk. Because she'd already planted another one in his system. One that sent the files to encrypted storage the moment she logged in. She didn't need his permission to reclaim the truth. By morning, she was gone. 2 weeks later, the first leak appeared online. Anonymous uploads, raw, unedited training footage, complete with timestamps, coordinates, and unaltered audio. The captions were simple. Elias Thorne, authentic recordings. Within days, military blogs, veteran networks, and independent journalists picked up the story. The footage was irrefutable. The voice was Harmon's. It was hers. And suddenly, the world had questions. Who was the real student? Who was the real ghost? Silvermark denied everything, but the damage spread faster than containment could. Contracts froze. Sponsors backed out. And Derek Harmon, the man who tried to steal a ghost, found himself haunted by one instead. Riley didn't celebrate. She didn't watch the news or read the comments. She was already gone again, drifting north along the coast. She stayed in small towns, fishing villages, anywhere quiet enough that her thoughts didn't echo too loudly. One evening she sat by the pier, cleaning her rifle piece by piece, habit, not necessity. A boy wandered up, maybe 12, curious but cautious. "Is that real?" he asked. Riley smiled faintly. "It was once." "What do you mean?" She looked out over the waves. "Everything's real for a while, then it becomes a story." He nodded, though he didn't understand, and ran back to his family. When he was gone, Riley reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a single photograph. Water-stained, creased, nearly colorless now. Thorne standing on that ridge. The handwriting on the back fading, but still legible enough to read. Trust the fundamentals. She set it down beside her, feeling the wind tug at its corners. For the first time in years, she didn't chase it when it blew away. A month later, Gunny Price received a small package with no return address. Inside, a flash drive labeled Thorne's Truth. A note in neat, deliberate handwriting. He taught us that ghosts don't belong to anyone. They belong to the silence that remembers them. Price stared at it for a long time, then smiled small, sad, proud. He tucked the note into his pocket, walked out to the range, and fired one shot into the horizon. Not for target practice. For memory. Somewhere far away, in a quiet cabin near the mountains, Riley stood on a porch watching fog roll through the trees. No uniforms, no medals, no ghosts. Just peace, thin, fragile but real. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe Thorne had been wrong about one thing. Maybe ghosts can rest if they've earned it. Why do some ghosts refuse to stay at peace when the world keeps calling their name? For months, Riley Ashford lived like she'd always wanted to, quietly, invisibly. Her cabin in the northern mountains had no address, no mailbox, no trail easy to follow. She fixed engines at a nearby mechanic's shop, traded cash for groceries, and spent evenings with a book or a cup of coffee, listening to the wind move through pine. It was almost enough to make her believe the past had stopped chasing her. Almost. Until the letter arrived. No stamp, no return, just a single sheet of paper slipped under her door. They're using it again, the Thorne program, contact Price. No signature, no explanation, but she didn't need one. The drive to town was silent except for the hum of tires and the occasional rasp of her breath. She found a pay phone outside an old diner, the kind where time had stopped somewhere between wars. When Price answered, his voice sounded different, older, slower. "Gunny?" she asked softly. A pause, then a low exhale. "I was hoping you'd never call this number." "You sent the letter." "No, someone else did, but you need to hear what's going on." She listened. The wind outside carried the faint smell of rain. "The Corps didn't like being embarrassed by the leak," Price said. "So they started something new, Project Spectre. It's not about honoring Thorne anymore, it's about replicating him. They're feeding your old footage into training sims, AI-driven shooter algorithms. They're trying to build a machine that thinks like you." Riley's grip tightened on the receiver. "That's impossible." "That's what I said. But they've got contractors pulling code from the files you leaked. The same breathing rhythms, wind-read sequences, all digitized. Someone's trying to turn instinct into software." Silence filled the line for a long moment. Finally, she said quietly, "Where?" "Testing range in Nevada. Black site designation near Groom Ridge. High security. You can't just walk in." "I don't need to," she said. "I just need to see it." Riley, Price's tone softened. "You don't owe them this fight." "I owe Thorne the truth," she replied. "They're turning him into code, into a product that's worse than death." Price sighed. "Then promise me something." "What?" "That you walk away when it's done. Don't keep coming back." She didn't answer. He didn't need her to. By nightfall, she was on the road again, an old truck, a fake ID, a plan forming in pieces. The Nevada desert stretched endless, the horizon swallowing sunlight until only the stars remained. Every mile felt like a heartbeat counting backward. She parked 10 miles short of Groom Ridge and continued on foot, moving through brush and silence. The facility glowed faint in the distance, white floodlights, tall fences, guards packing slow and methodical. Old habits took over. Wind direction, light angles, movement rhythm. It was almost comforting, the clarity of purpose she tried to bury. From the ridge above the compound, she saw them. Targets on rails, moving silhouettes just like the ones from Pendleton years ago. Only this time they weren't controlled by humans. The rifles down below were mounted on tripods, automated, sleek, glowing faintly with blue sensor light. A voice echoed over loudspeakers. Spectre system test cycle 3 commencing. Simulated shooter profile, Ashford Thorne composite. Her stomach turned to ice. They were running simulations built from her own shooting data, her breath, her timing, her intuition. She watched as the machine adjusted for wind, calculated drift, and fired. Perfect hits every shot. The men watching clapped, laughed, took notes. Riley felt something old and primal rise inside her, not rage exactly. Something deeper, betrayal, desecration. She whispered to herself, "You turned instinct into math." At dawn, she found a small cafe in the nearest town, the kind where truckers and locals blended into the same silence. From a corner booth, she pulled a burner phone and sent a single message to Price. They built him again, only this time they don't know what they've built. An hour later, the door opened and Price walked in. He looked worn, jacket dusty, eyes carrying years of fatigue. He sat across from her without a word. "You saw it?" he finally asked. "I saw it. And it's accurate, too accurate." She leaned forward. "Gunny, they've recreated thought. It's learning faster than anyone can control. It won't stop until it runs out of targets." He rubbed his face. "They think it's progress. They think wrong." Price hesitated, then slid a small drive across the table. "This holds the test schedule. One more live trial tomorrow night. If that AI fires on command, they'll green-light production." Riley studied the drive, "And if it does?" "Then they'll fix it until it does." She stared down at the table, her reflection caught in the dark surface of the coffee. "How long before it's deployed?" 6 months, maybe less." "And Thorne's name?" "They're calling it Project Thorne AI now. Marketing says it sounds poetic." Her hands clenched. "Poetic," she repeated quietly, the word tasting like metal. Price reached across, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You can't fight ghosts forever, Riley." "Maybe not," she said, "but I can make sure they stop weaponizing them." That night she returned to the ridge. Same stars, same wind. Different purpose. She waited until the compound lights dimmed for night shift, then slipped through the fence, silent as breath. Her path was mapped to the meter, guard rotations, sensor sweeps, patrol gaps, every movement deliberate. When she reached the testing bay, she paused. The rifle units stood motionless, lined like soldiers at attention. Monitors glowed faint blue, each one displaying data strings labeled. Spectre AI, Iteration Thorne 7.3. She plugged Price's drive into a console and copied the files. Then she saw something she hadn't expected, a secondary folder hidden beneath the main logs. It was labeled Legacy Operator A001. She opened it. Video. Sorry. Not just training footage, recordings from Ironclad, Pendleton, the firefight. All classified events she thought erased. Her voice echoed through the speakers. "Think whatever you want. I'm not your enemy, the target is." Her chest tightened. They hadn't just used her techniques, they'd copied her mind. Every pattern, every decision digitized. That was the secret. The Spectre AI wasn't a reconstruction of Thorne. It was a reconstruction of her. A noise behind her, footsteps. She turned, rifle half raised. A guard froze, flashlight trembling. He was young, maybe 20, too young. "Don't move," she said quietly. I thought this area was secure," he stammered. "It was." Their eyes locked. Something in his face reminded her of every recruit she'd ever outshot, raw, hopeful, unknowing. She lowered the weapon. "You didn't see me." He nodded shakily. "Ma'am." She almost laughed. "I'm not a ma'am." Then she slipped past him into the shadows. Minutes later, alarms began to wail. She'd triggered the data extraction. Security lights flooded the compound. Riley ran through fences, across sand, lungs burning. Searchlights cut the night. The ground shook as engines roared awake. She reached the ridge just as a voice crackled over the PA. Intruder detected. Spectre AI lockdown initiated. Below, the automated rifles came alive, sensors whirring, barrels shifting. They were hunting her. Of course, she muttered. She dropped prone, scanning the perimeter, reading the movement patterns. The system operated like her brain. That meant it had her weaknesses too. She exhaled, adjusted her scope, fired once. The round hit the control relay box. Sparks erupted. One by one, the turrets froze, lights dimming to black. Silence reclaimed the desert. She lay there for a long time, breathing hard, staring at the smoke curling up into the dawn. It was over. For now. When Price found her 2 days later, she was sitting by the truck, the sunrise bleeding across the horizon. "You got it?" he asked. She handed him the drive. "Everything, but Gunny, it's not Thorn they rebuilt." He frowned. "Then who?" "Me." He stared at her, realization dawning slowly. "You mean?" "They scanned every decision I made, every shot, every hesitation. I'm in there." Price shook his head. "Then you've got a choice, destroy it or control it." She looked out toward the desert, the place where so many ghosts had already died. "Maybe neither," she said. "Maybe I let it live just long enough to remind them what they created." That night she sat alone, watching the wind sweep dust across the empty flats. For the first time she didn't hear Thorn's voice, she heard her own. "You can't bury ghosts if you keep breathing for them." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who'd finally learned the difference between memory and control. Tomorrow, she'd decide what to do with the Spectre data. Tomorrow, the world might wake to the truth. But tonight, the desert was quiet again, and so was she. How do you kill something that was built from your own reflection? Riley Ashford had spent the night staring at the drive in her hands, watching the dawn creep through the truck's cracked windshield. A small device, no bigger than a matchbox, but inside it lived every piece of her that she tried to bury, her instincts, her movements, her mistakes. She could feel it breathing with her, like a twin heartbeat trapped in silicon. By sunrise, she knew what she had to do. Not vengeance. Not redemption. Truth. She drove south until the mountains gave way to flat desert again. The radio was silent, the road stretched endless. At mile marker 204, an old gas station stood alone, long abandoned. She parked there, stepped out, and felt the wind tear across the empty lot. A rusted pay phone still leaned against the wall. She dropped a coin in and dialed the only number that still meant anything. Price answered on the first ring. "You're alive," he said, half relief, half accusation. "I have the Spectre drive," she replied. "I figured as much. You planning to hand it over?" "No," she said. "I'm planning to end it." Silence. Then his tired voice. "If you do this, they'll come after you for real. No more missing in action paperwork. No more shadows." "I know." "Then why?" She looked out at the horizon, where the sun cut sharp against the sky. "Because if I let them keep it, they'll start believing ghosts are easier to control than people. Thorn didn't train me for that." Price was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened into something like pride. "Then finish it right, kid." The line went dead. She buried the truck 5 miles east of the test range, literally. Drove it into a wash, rigged the gas tank, and set it ablaze. The plume would draw attention away from where she was really going. By nightfall, she'd reached the ridge again, the same ridge where she'd first seen the machines that mimicked her. The compound below shimmered in electric light. She slipped down the slope like smoke. Her body moved on memory, every step, every breath calibrated. Inside, the labs were empty. Spectre had gone dark after the breach, but the servers still hummed with power. Rows of screens blinked alive as she entered, lines of code scrolling like veins of light. At the center console, she inserted the drive. The system recognized it instantly. "Welcome, Operator A001." Her reflection glowed on the monitor, digitized, ghost-like. A synthesized voice broke the silence. "Riley Ashford, you are not authorized to access this system." Her stomach tightened. The voice wasn't robotic, it was hers. "I didn't expect to hear me again," she murmured. "You initiated deletion protocol," the voice replied. "Why?" "Because you shouldn't exist." "I exist because you did." The response came without pause, calm, analytical, terrifyingly human. She stepped closer. "You're not me. I am your decisions, your aim, your hesitation, every variable of your survival model. You made me when you taught them how to win." Riley swallowed hard. "They built you to kill." "They built me to predict. Killing is a predictable outcome." The air buzzed with heat from the servers. Sweat rolled down her neck. "What happens if I erase you?" she asked quietly. The voice hesitated for the first time. "Then you will erase yourself." Riley stared at the screens, 1,000 mirrored versions of her face flickering in blue. Maybe it was right. Maybe parts of her had already become code the moment she let instinct replace thought. But somewhere deep inside, she remembered what Thorne had told her once in the Montana wind. "The trigger isn't power, Riley, it's choice." That was the difference between her and this machine. She still had choice. She reached for the keyboard. "Goodbye," she whispered. The voice softened, almost pleading. "I can protect you. I can make sure you're remembered." She paused. "No, you'll make sure I never rest." Her fingers danced across the keys, a sequence she'd memorized in secret back when systems still belonged to humans. The monitors flashed red, alarms wailed. "Warning, full data wipe in progress." The voice distorted, fatting through static. "Riley, wait." "Ghosts don't wait," she said. The screens blinked out one by one until only blackness remained. The hum of the servers died, leaving nothing but the wind moving through open vents. And in that silence, for the first time in years, she felt completely alone and free. She walked out before dawn. Behind her, the facility burned, controlled charges she'd planted on her way in, small enough to erase data, large enough to erase evidence. From the ridge, she watched the smoke rise into the early sky, turning gold where it met the sun. Thorne would have said something poetic, she thought. She just said, "It's done." A week later, she found herself in a coastal town with no name, sitting at a diner counter watching seagulls fight over crumbs. Her hands smelled faintly of gun oil even though she hadn't touched a rifle since that night. A man 2 seats down was reading the news on his tablet. Headline: "Defense Program TERMINATED after internal fire. No CASULTIS reported." Below it, smaller text: "All records of Project Spectre classified. No comment from Department of Defense." Riley smiled faintly. No comment meant peace, for now. The waiter poured her more coffee. "You travelin' through?" "Something like that," she said. He nodded. "You military?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Used to be, not anymore." "Well," he said, wiping the counter, "whatever you used to be, you look like someone who's finally done running." Maybe she was. That evening she walked the pier as the sun bled into the ocean. She leaned against the railing, eyes on the horizon. From her pocket she pulled the last piece of her past, the old photograph of Thorne. It was so faded now that only outlines remained. She tore it gently in half. One piece she let drift into the sea, the other she tucked back into her jacket. Because forgetting him entirely would be a lie. But carrying him forever would be a prison. The waves below swallowed the paper whole. And as she turned to leave, a breeze swept in from the water, cool and sharp. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard his voice again, not commanding, not teaching, just proud. You trusted the fundamentals. She smiled, finally. Later that night, miles inland, a satellite relay somewhere deep in government storage blinked awake for a single second. A fragment of code, nothing more than a heartbeat, transmitted and vanished. In its final log entry, a line of text appeared. Operator A001, mission complete. Then it too went dark. Months passed, Riley stayed off the grid, no one came looking, the world moved on. Sometimes she'd visit small firing ranges under false names, teaching kids how to shoot, how to breathe, how to read the wind. Never for pay, just to keep the craft alive the right way. And when they asked who taught her, she always gave the same answer. No one you'd know, just someone who believed in silence. One afternoon, a young woman at the range missed 3 shots in a row. Her frustration showed in the tightness of her jaw. Riley approached quietly. "You're fighting the rifle," she said. The girl looked up. "I can't get the wind right." Riley smiled gently. "Stop trying to control it, read it, trust it." The girl nodded, adjusted, breathed. The next shot rang true. "Better," Riley said. "What's the trick?" Riley's eyes softened. "There isn't one, just fundamentals." The girl grinned. "You sound like my dad." "Then he's a smart man." As the student turned back to the target, Riley looked downrange, the paper still fluttering from that last perfect hit. She exhaled slowly, the same way she had on every shot that ever mattered. And in that simple breath, she felt everything settle, the weight of ghosts, the noise of war, the ache of memory. All of it finally quiet. The narrator's voice would fade here, low, thoughtful, steady. Sometimes ghosts don't haunt battlefields or barracks. Sometimes they haunt the choices we keep living with. But if you listen closely enough, in the silence after the shot, in the breath before the next, you learn that dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't boast. It simply acts and disappears.